Hi, I'm Robert Wilkinson. I'm an IT business development manager for a company called Sentrian. We're a managed services provider based in Brisbane who specialize in working with law firms to make the most out of their technology investments. In terms of what we do for law firms, we're quite the generalist. So we come in and we help law firms, especially small to medium-sized law firms, with making sure that their IT A works and B is providing value for the business. Now, what that tends to mean is that we come in and as a core offering, we take care of all the support and management of both the people and the services and software that they use. And on top of that, we can also help with things like providing software solutions. We provide security solutions, hosting solutions, and telephony. So pretty much everything that has an IP address associated with it is what we can do. Now, why do law firms need this sort of help? It's pretty obvious, but at the end of the day, everyone knows that a law firm is an information business. You can't run a law firm without IT. It's just not possible. We can't go back to the days where everything was kept in a file and stuck on a shelf somewhere. So IT is very integral to how the business runs and how it operates and how efficient it can be. And that's where a managed services provider, which is what we are, can come in. We can help with making that efficiency work for the business and make sure that the business's people are kept productive and happy. No, is the short answer. It's not fair to assume that an IT organization is going to keep your data secure. Now, there's a longer story behind that. It's very much a gray area as to who's responsible for what. But as you can imagine, uh, an IT company doesn't have access to all of the component parts to make sure that your data and your people are secure. They have access to a lot of the technical pieces that sit on the side and allow your users to actually work every day and to try and keep your data secure. But that's only half the story. The second half of the story is the people themselves. Now, a large part of IT security comes down to how prepared your people are and what sort of security culture you have in your organization. If you don't have a security culture and people aren't aware of security, then it doesn't matter how many bells and whistles and software applications you've got, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So at the end of the day, the IT team is mostly responsible for making sure that the software is configured correctly, that the hardware is secured, that all of the electronics are doing their piece. But it's incumbent upon the law firm itself to make sure that all of their people are aware of their responsibilities, that they're aware of the threats that are out there that can be used against law firms, and that they have a culture in place where people are aware of what they need to do in order to keep the firm secure and the firm's data. So when it comes to what to look for in your contract with regards to security, there are a few things. And by security, security can mean a lot of different things, but it generally means, keeping the data safe one way or another. I think when it comes to making sure that your data is available for your firm, the first thing that you should be looking for is some sort of acknowledgement that the data actually belongs to you. This needs to be in your contract so that there's no ambiguity around who owns the data, regardless of where it resides. The second thing you should be looking for in your contract is a statement of intent regarding how security works in the context of your business. Now, that could be something very simple that just acknowledges that there is a security component as it relates to you and your business and your data. But it can get much more involved depending on what it is that you're contracting for. When it comes to a typical service desk contract, there may not be a huge amount involved at all because the service desk is essentially a response mechanism. So something goes wrong, you call up the service desk and they go and fix it. There's not necessarily a lot involved in terms of how security is undertaken in the firm. However, if you've got a contract that is more for hosting, for argument's sake, then there needs to be some provisions in that contract that talks about where the data resides, who has access to it. This is a tough one to answer, but the most common questions you should probably ask are, firstly, what do the services and the products that you have purchased actually do? One of the primary problems that law firms have with understanding where they are with an engagement is exactly what the products do. As a lawyer, you're not expected to be an IT expert. However, what you need to know is the bare bones and the basics as to how and what the products and services that you are purchasing do. Without that, it's very difficult to make an assessment as to what your risk is and where you have unexplored gaps. The second thing is you should be asking your IT company how they engage with the firm when it comes to security. It's not good enough to have a single engagement at the beginning of the contract and then that's it for the rest of the contract. Security is an ongoing conversation, and your IT company has to have a plan and must have a way of keeping you up to date and engaging with you every year to discuss what the latest problems are and what the latest solutions are. You should also ask your security company what sort of frameworks and what standards they have in place to secure your data as well. IT companies, especially managed services providers, are prime vectors for attacks on other firms like yours. So if your IT company isn't taking security seriously and haven't implemented standards and foundational practices within their business, then that can be a very big problem. The other thing you should ask them is, do you have anyone in a leadership position within your company that actually takes care of security and is responsible for security? Having someone in the leadership team responsible gives a good indication that the MSP takes cybersecurity very seriously and that there's somewhere where the buck stops. The big issues that can't be delegated to IT support are around company culture with regards to security. At the end of the day, you can only do so much with electronics and software. Your people are your first line of defense, and there's not a huge amount that your MSP can do to help with that. There are some things like ongoing training for security, but security needs to be driven from the top of the organization down and is not going to be able to be run by the MSP themselves. A business should start with a third party assessment of where their security currently stands. Now, there are a few different ways that you can go about this, and there are some tools that you can actually get that are pretty useful for a starting point. One of those tools is the QLS Cybersecurity Assessment Tool. Now, that tool, whilst relatively basic, is going to give you a pretty good understanding of where you are from a foundational level. Once you have that foundational level, you can start to speak to your MSP about filling some of those gaps. The gold standard is always going to be going and having a third party come in and take a very deep dive look at what you've got. But that can come a bit later on down the track once you've got some quick wins in place. That yes, there is a distinction between an IT provider and a cybersecurity provider. There are a bunch of different types of IT providers, but the most common one that works with law firms is what's called a managed services provider. The managed services provider is, if you think of it in terms of doctors, a managed services provider is like a general practitioner, whereas your security providers are more like a specialist. The general practitioner can diagnose and work with you on a lot of your security requirements. But when you have very specific requirements or you have very specific services that are needed, they'll usually refer you off to someone like a security services provider. It also helps when you have a relationship with an MSP that you have someone else look at what they're doing as an uninterested third party. And that's where the security provider can come in and give you that unbiased view as to what you're doing is it correct or is it not? No. At the end of the day, you'll find that most of the cloud services providers have provisions in their contract that essentially puts the responsibility of ensuring that your data is safe back on to you as the business. They will take some prudent measures, and there are a lot of things that they do that will keep your data relatively safe. But for instance, Microsoft, when you look at their Microsoft 365 product, are very explicit in saying that they're not responsible for making sure that you have a backup of your data. At the end of the day, you're responsible for your data, and you need to take specific measures to make sure that you're happy with where it is and how it's being managed.